The tale of Hyacinthus is about a male companion of the god Apollo who is killed during a game of discus or horseshoes and is unable to save his dear friend Hyacinth, who is turned into a flower that today still bears his name. And the myth is subject to much speculation, like always, right? And further speculation about whether, again, it's really about homosexuality or whether it's about some kind of male bond that has kind of been perverted. But I'd argue the hyacinth is a symbol much like the poppy today. It's about brotherhood of soldier, fighting and dying for each other, never leaving a man behind. Values that are still important and mythologized in film, whether it be war or just normal life. But of course, like any myth, it can be reinterpreted and perverted over the course of 500 years or thousands of years. Specifically, the story of Hyacinthus is the death of Patroclus, or the stand by Menelaus and Ajax to guard the body of Patroclus from the Trojans, namely Hector. So Hector was able to steal Achilles' armor from Patroclus' dead body, but he wasn't able to take the body of Patroclus himself, and the body is important in order to perform the funeral rites and sacrifices to ensure a safe trip into the afterlife, and the fight and deaths of others around the body of Patroclus, but others like Sarpedon are metaphors for the growth of flowers in the spring, namely those with medicinal or drug-like effects that could be of value to those in charge of soldiers or labor markets or really any facet of society. Everyone takes a drug or plant-derived medicine in their daily lives, and commodities like coffee, right, that give us caffeine are huge parts of economies. It makes sense that one whole book in the Iliad or two whole books in the Iliad are really devoted to cataloging and kind of describing the different species of plants, trees, as well as animals, and using these as allegory for politics, military, the economy, and ultimately religion. In Book 16, Patroclus, donning Achilles' armor, leads the Myrmidons into battle, and the first thing he does is throw his spear at a Trojan at the stern of the ship of Protesilaus. Protesilaus means first among the people, where protos means first or before the, and laos is people, so it's before the people. And Protesilaus was the first of the Achaeans to step foot on the beach of Troy. And it's kind of like this invasion of Normandy, this battle scene that has been memorialized in many films, right? Like most famously Saving Private Ryan, and stepping foot on the beach first and dying in this rain of machine gun bullets. And if you remember the movie specifically, the beginning is like this horrific display of gore and suffering. So the medic is an important character in the film, and we're introduced to him right away, and he delivers morphine to like dying people, because morphine is really the only thing you can do for a lot of people that are dying and suffering on that beach that day. And that's kind of the scene you have with Book 16, and Patroclus is fighting around the boats on the shore. So let's read further from Iliad, Book 16, where Patroclus enters the battle. Patroclus first aimed a spear into the middle of the press, where men were packed most closely by the stern of the ship of Protesilaus. He hit Percames, who had led his Paeonian horsemen from the Amazon in the broad waters of the river Axius. The spear struck him on the right shoulder, and with a groan he fell backwards in the dust. On this his men were thrown into confusion, for by killing their leader, who was the finest soldier among them, Patroclus struck panic into them all. He thus drove them from the ship and quenched the fire that was then blazing, leaving the half-burned ship to lie where it was. The Trojans were now driven back with a shout that rent the skies, while the Danaans poured after them from the ships, shouting also without ceasing. As when Jove, gatherer of the thundercloud, spreads a dense canopy on the top of some lofty mountain, and all the peaks, the jutting headlands, and forest glades show out in the great light that flashes from the bursting heavens. Even so, when the Danaans had now driven back the fire from their ships, they took breath for a little while, but the fury of the fight was not yet over, for the Trojans were not driven back in utter rout, but still gave battle, and were ousted from the ground only by sheer fighting. So if you go back to the beginning of the Iliad, and Book 2 in particular, you have the catalog of the ships that came to Troy, right, that Homer lays out. And Protesilaus is described as the first to land on Troy, right? He's this an allegory probably for the arrival of the poppy, maybe to Anatolia, you could interpret. But I'm not sure if that's correct because most people theorize today the poppy was native to the Eastern Mediterranean or even to Anatolia itself. So it could mean that the poppy was introduced to Greece or Crete through the cult of Demeter, and the name, of course, the name again, Protesilos, means proto or first, and Blaus, so the people. So he's before the people. He's the first of the people. So let's read from the Iliad, Book 2, part of the catalogue of the ships. And those that held Phylace in the flowery meadows of Parassus, sanctuary of Demeter, Eton, the mother of sheep, Antrum upon the sea, and Telelium that lies upon the grassy lands. Of these brave Protesilos had been captain while he was yet alive, but he was now lying under the earth. He had left a wife behind him in Phylace to tear her cheeks in sorrow, and his house was only half finished, for he was slain by a Dardanian warrior while leaping foremost of the Achaeans upon the soil of Troy. Still, though his people mourned their chieftain, they were not without a leader. So Protesilos hails from the flowery meadows of Parassus, sanctuary of Demeter, the goddess associated with poppies, in addition to seasons and vegetation. And of course, we all know spring brings the first flowers. And some of these flowers were important for all kinds of medicinal and spiritual purposes. And cults would obviously develop around their harvest and annual life cycle, much like today. Pumpkin spice lattes, right? And even with heroin addicts. Like, you can tell who's in the pumpkin spice latte cult from how they dress and language, but also when they start to appear, right, in the certain time of the year, and beginning in the fall harvest, right? And also, like heroin addicts, they're always looking to harvest, but they're by how they dress, how they talk, and how they act, it's the same, right? They're worshiping this kind of harvest god. And in Book 16 and Book 17 is the account of some of the bloodiest and most gruesome of the fighting. It goes into the extreme detail of the carnage of a Bronze Age battle. It kind of leaves no doubt that you need medicine, right? Most importantly, opiates. You need a morphine-like drug to heal people in the most excruciating of pain, right? Without opiates, there's just a limit to the violence and gore that people are willing to suffer and see. The camp and people are fickle, right? Morale is very important in fighting. It's a psychological battle as much as a physical battle. And if people are seeing everyone's just in terrible pain, they're going to give up. So medicine, surgeons, doctors give us false sense of invulnerability, right? Add to that war propaganda, like a Hollywood movie, and people are going to sign up for war, unknowing how brutal it is, and how you're not going to come back the same, right? You might be injured, or you might just come back psychologically distressed or impacted, or you might just become back addicted, right? Right. So opiates would be very important. You might even try to start a war over this kind of field where you grow or place where you grow opiates. And I would go even further, interpret these passages as describing kind of the processing and harvesting and manufacture of opiates and how you kind of pick it and to extract the material, right? It's kind of this latex material that is exuded from the poppy, this milky substance. And how do you get it? You got to tear it apart and rip into it and cut it. And I think that's kind of how you got to interpret these next passages. So let's read further. Of the sons of Nestor, one, Antilochus, speared Atimneus, driving the point of the spear through his throat, and down he fell. Maris then sprang on Antilochus in hand-to-hand fight to avenge his brother, and bestrode the body, spear in hand. But valiant Thrasymedes was too quick for him, and in a moment had struck him in the shoulder, ere he could deal his blow. His aim was true, and the spear severed all the muscles at the root of his arm, and tore them right down to the bone. So he fell heavily to the ground, and his eyes were closed in darkness. Thus did these two noble comrades of Sarpedon go down to Erebus, slain by the two sons of Nestor. They were the warrior sons of Amisadorus, who had reared the invincible Chimera, to the bane of many. Ajax, son of Oileus, sprang on Cleobulus and took him alive as he was entangled in the crush, but he killed him then, and there by a sword blow on the neck the sword reeked with his blood, while dark death and the strong hand of fate gripped him and closed his eyes. Peneleos and Lycon now met in close fight, for they had missed each other with their spears. They had both thrown without effect, so now they drew their swords. Lycon struck the plumed crest of Peneleos' helmet, but his sword broke at the hilt, while Peneleos smote Lycon on the neck under the ear. The blade sank so deep that the head was held on by nothing but the skin, and there was no more life left in him. Meriones gave chase to Acamas on foot and caught him up just so as he was about to mount his chariot. He drove a spear through his right shoulder so that he fell headlong from the car, and his eyes were closed in darkness. Idiomenes speared Eremos in the mouth. The bronze point of the spear went clean through it beneath the brain, crashing in among the white bones and smashing them up. His teeth were all of them knocked out, and the blood came gushing in a stream from both his eyes. It also came gurgling up from his mouth and nostrils, and the darkness of death enfolded him round about. So again, perhaps another way to look at the passages like this, besides kind of the medicinal effects and benefits of surgery and medicine, is through the processing of plant material for drugs, like the poppy plant. When the poppy is cut, it releases a latex-type substance that contains the opiate, like molecules or the precursors necessary for the further manufacture of a more purified substance. And I'm sure the process was sophisticated in the past and organized by a central power. And okay, yeah, they weren't making fentanyl, but at the same time, it's not rocket science to kind of pick and mash up flowers and through kind of a series of separations and extractions to arrive at a more purified substance than you started with. It's certainly not beyond Neolithic or Bronze Age technology. The end product being something that you could probably mix with your wine to have this kind of pain-relieving and euphoric feeling. It's like drinking codeine with some nice ice-cold grape soda like Faygo. Also, the language throughout the Iliad, but in particular, this part suggests or implies an agricultural theme where words like root, plant, sprang, rise, etc. can be interpreted or understood as both instructional manual for various agricultural cults, but also as hymn or religious ceremony for working people. So going back to the Iliad, after killing a bunch of people, Patroclus is spotted by the Lycian captain Sarpedon, who rallies his men to go take on the Greeks. So Patroclus and Sarpedon see each other and square up with one another and prepare for battle. And Jove begins to have kind of mixed feelings about it, as Sarpedon is one of his own sons. But again, it's his wife Juno who insists that he not meddle in the fight between him and Patroclus because she favors the Greeks. And it's kind of the opposite of the story of Ganymede or Aeneas, who were plucked away and saved from battle by the gods, because Sarpedon is going to die. He's not going to be swooped away and carried to safety, which I interpret is, at this point in the religion of the Greeks, the gods are becoming extremely meddlesome in the mortals' lives, like that in the Iliad, where there are now so many towns and kingdoms founded, with each a patron deity connected to an Olympian, which causes the major gods to be torn between loyalties to all their children who fight now amongst one another. And in reality, the worship of gods happened on a local level, where many cities would have a major temple of worship for a local deity, along with the traditional pan-Hellenic pantheon. So, for instance, a god like Poseidon or Neptune could be worshipped in a locale as the hometown hero, so to speak, but also all the other gods would be worshipped and sacrificed too, but Poseidon or Neptune, or whatever god it may be, would hold a sacred and special significance to that locality as a founding deity. Eventually, the gods are going to begin coupling with mortals and nymphs and river gods and spreading their connection and lineage to all the smallest of localities, right? They're going to go down to towns and villages, and each like backwater village is going to have some kind of god or demigod to worship. So the line of the gods is passed down to demigods like Sarpedon, who they themselves come to be worshipped by the mortals. So you can see how a myth like the Iliad could cause some trouble and subvert traditions of your local god, right? if your local god isn't so high up in the grand scheme of things of these like thousands of other gods, where exactly do they fit in, right? Where do they fit in among all this other pantheon? And it's kind of demoralizing, right? It leads to nihilism. There's just so many heroes and gods like your hometown figure, and it's overwhelming and leads people to lose belief, and the religion and all the allegiances become a behemoth of an institution or burden on people's lives that they just choose something simpler, which is obviously a monotheism. So, reading from Wikipedia, Sarpedon was actually worshipped, right? He was an actual site of worship. What that means, I don't know, but he was actually worshipped, right? So there's evidence to suggest that Sarpedon was the subject of pre-Homeric non-Greek worship. And having a Trojan War hero also as the brother of Minos involves a genealogical difficulty, since Minos lived 3 generations before the Trojan War. In some accounts, Zeus granted his son Sarpedon the gift of long life. Such a gift is already suggested by the Hesiodic catalogue fragment in Apollodorus. Perhaps drawing on the catalogue, says that Zeus allowed his and Europa's son Sarpedon to live for 3 generations. However, by other accounts, the Sarpedon who was the brother of Minos and the Sarpedon who fought at Troy were different. And Diodorus of Sicily says that, according to Cretan myth, the Sarpedon, who was the son of Zeus and Europa, and the brother with the brother of Minos and Rhadamanthus. See how this is like becoming too much? It's just too much. The brother of the brother. So it's just too much. It's too much. And going furthermore, if we take a look at the possible etymology of the name Sarpedon, there's 2 possible theories I have. One is if you combine sarco plus pedo, where sarco means flesh-like and pedo, foot. And another possibility is sauro plus pedo, where sauro means lizard-like, and of course, again, pedo means foot. But I would argue that an etymology of a flesh-like foot would make more sense if we understand Sarpedon is kind of like this metaphor for a plant or a flower, or even more so just the stem of like it's this flesh-like foot of a flower, right? The flesh-like foot of a flower would make more sense if you understand the Iliad kind of through this processing, growing, harvesting, and manufacturing of opium-like materials or opium-like drugs from poppy plants. And eventually, Patroclus kills Sarpedon, hitting him with the spear in the midriff in the area surrounding his heart, as Homer describes in Book 16 of the Iliad. And when Sarpedon is hit with the spear thrown by Patroclus, he lays dying, and his friend Glaucus comes to his aid. And Glaucus was the cousin of Sarpedon, a fellow Lycian, and grandson of Bellerophon. And Glaucus is interesting, too, from his exchange with Diomedes in Book 6 of the Iliad. Essentially, through the paradox of his exchange with Diomedes, it reveals the operating logic and interface of market economies. You know, the way a market economy is kept in control of a small elite, and it's through nepotism, most specifically through the line of the father. And also, Glaucus is interesting in that his name or etymology is kind of this play on word, right? It means both a color, but also a way of concealing one's identity or father's identity for strategic purposes in order to gain control of, once again, of capital markets. Glaucus, or this glimmering bluish green color, is the resonant aura of Hebrew crypsis, right? Seen throughout the mysterious religions developing out of the Iron Age after the Bronze Age collapse. It's this bluish green glow. And if you read from Wikipedia, Glaucus, once again, it means grayish blue or gray, and it's used to describe the pale gray or bluish green appearances of the surfaces of some plants, as well as in the name of birds, such as the Glaucus gull, Laurus hyperboreus. The term glaucus is also used botanically as an adjective to mean covered with grayish, bluish, or whitish, waxy coating or bloom that is easily rubbed off. For example, glaucus leaves. And the poppy plant is glaucus. I mean, you could read it from Wikipedia. The plant is strongly glaucous, giving a grayish green appearance, and the stem and the leaves bear a sparse distribution of coarse hairs. So I imagine having Sarpedon and Glaucus close proximity within the poem, you have a metaphor for the greenish, bluish, or grayish waxy coating on the fleshy leg of the poppy plants. That's right. It's the coarse hairs on the poppy that give it this color. But also, there's medicinal properties within the fleshy leg, and if you cut it open, that's how you get it. So, reading further, Book 16 of the Iliad. Now, when Sarpedon saw his comrades, men who wore ungirdled tunics, becoming overcome by Patroclus, son of Menoetius, he rebuked the Lycians, saying, "Shame on you! Where are you flying to? Show your mettle. I will myself meet this man in fight, and learn who it is that is so masterful. He has done us much hurt, and has stretched many a brave man upon the ground." He sprang from his chariot as he spoke, and Patroclus, when he saw this, leaped onto the ground also. The two then rushed at one another with loud cries, like eagle-beaked, crook-taloned vultures that scream and tear at one another in some high mountain fastness. The son of scheming Saturn looked down upon them in pity, and said to Juno, who was his wife and sister, "Alas, that it should be the lot of Sarpedon, whom I love so dearly, to perish by the hand of Patroclus. I am in two minds whether to catch him up out of the fight, and set him down safe and sound in the fertile land of Lycia, or to let him now fall by the hand of the son of Menoetius." And Juno answered, most dread son of Saturn, what is this that you are saying? Would you snatch a mortal man whose doom has long been fated out of the jaws of death? Do as you will, but we shall not all of us be of your mind. I say further, and lay my saying to your heart, that if you send Sarpedon safely to his own home, some other of the gods will also be wanting to escort his son out of battle. For there are many sons of gods fighting around the city of Troy, and you will make everyone jealous. If, however, you are fond of him and pity him, let him indeed fall by the hands of Patroclus. But as soon as the life is gone out of him, send death in sweet sleep to bear him off the field, and take him to the broad lands of Lycia, where his brothers and his kinsmen will bury him with mound and pillar in due honor to the dead. The sire of gods and men assented, but he shed a rain of blood upon the earth in honor of his son, whom Patroclus was about to kill on the rich plain of Troy, far from his home. When they were now close to one another, Patroclus struck Thrasydemus, the brave squire of Sarpedon, in the lower part of the belly, and killed him. Sarpedon then aimed a spear at Patroclus and missed him, but he struck the horse of Pedasus in the right shoulder, and it screamed aloud as it lay groaning in the dust until the life went out of it. The other two horses began to plunge. The pole of the chariot cracked, and they got entangled in the reins through the fall of the horse that was yoked along with them. But Automedon knew what to do. Without the loss of a moment, he drew the keen blade that hung by his sturdy thigh and cut the third horse adrift, whereon the other two, righting themselves and pulling hard at the reins, again went together into battle. Sarpedon now took a second aim at Patroclus and again missed him. The point of the spear passed over his left shoulder without hitting him. Patroclus then aimed in his turn, and the spear sped not from his hand in vain, for he hit Sarpedon just where the midriff surrounds the ever-beating heart. He fell like some oak or silver poplar or tall pine to which woodmen have laid their axe upon the mountains to make timber for shipbuilding. Even so did he lie stretched at full length in front of his chariot and horses, moaning and clutching at the blood-stained dust, as when a lion springs with a bound upon a herd of cattle and fastens on a great black bull which dies bellowing in its clutches. Even so did the leader of the Lycian warriors struggle in death as he fell by the hands of Patroclus. He called on his trusty comrade and said, "Glaucus, my brother, hero among heroes, put forth all your strength, fight with might and main. Now if ever quit yourself like a valiant soldier, first go out about among the Lycian captains, and bid them fight for Sarpedon. Then yourself also do battle to save my armor from being taken. My name will haunt you henceforth and forever if the Achaeans rob me of my armor. Now that I have fallen at their ships, do your very utmost and call my people together." Therefore he prayed to far-darting Apollo, saying, "Hear me, O king, from your seat. May be in the rich land of Lycia, or may be in Troy. For all in places you can hear the prayer for one who is in distress. I now am. I have a grievous wound. My hand is aching with pain. There is no staunching the blood, and my whole arm drags by reason of my hurt, so that I cannot grasp my sword, nor go among my foes and fight them. Thou, our prince, Jove's son Sarpedon, is slain. Jove defended not his son. Do you, therefore, O king, heal me of my wound? ease my pain, and grant me strength both to cheer on the Lycians and to fight along with them round the body of him who has fallen? Dying, Sarpedon cries out to Glaucus to save his body and not let the Achaeans get to it. But Glaucus himself is hurt through earlier fighting in the war, so he prays to Apollo to come heal him so he can save his cousin Sarpedon and rescue his body, which is the major theme of Book 16 and Book 17 of the Iliad. And the poem of Hyacinthus and Ganymede also is the rescuing of mortal men or demigods by interventions of the major gods, and more specifically Apollo coming to heal Glaucus. And of course, Glaucus himself is associated with plants and the waxy surface, which we could associate with poppy and other plants that have pain-relieving properties that are extremely important during war. In addition, the poem Hyacinthus moralizes fighting and remembering those who fought and died in battle, the rescuing and fighting around dead bodies, not leaving fallen comrades behind. These are noble virtues, and it's associated both with the story of Sarpedon and Glaucus, but also Menelaus and Ajax, where the Hyacinthus is a yearly reminder of the sacrifice and honor that goes with the Spartan way of life, the heroic honor and sacrifice of fighting with your fellow men. Furthermore, the language again is symbolic, and it helps construct the agricultural cultic mythos of the Iliad and Metamorphoses. Right? It serves as an allegory for the real-life worship and religious ceremony evolving around the seasonal nature of plant and animal life, and using this knowledge as a form of spiritual worship of the natural world and adapting it to agricultural cults, again, that could be used to gain power, wealth, and influence. So words like tunic, armor, plant or planted, spear are used interchangeably with these poetic similes and metaphors regarding the natural world known to the Iron Age man. Right, I'm not a botanist, but if I was, I could become like this Neo-Pliny the Elder or something. But seriously, I could probably have a better understanding and interpretation of the words like tunic with respect to plants and what it means, because tunics and armor are an important part of Book 16 and Book 17 of the Iliad, where the fights are fiercest around the fallen bodies, along with the theme of stealing away your enemy's armor and body as this like trophy of war. And of course, this also serves as metaphor for plant life, and more specifically, those with beneficial herbal or medicinal properties. So reading further from Book 16 of the Iliad. Thus did he pray, and Apollo heard his prayer. He eased his pain, staunched the black blood from the wound, and gave him new strength. Glaucus perceived this, and was thankful that the mighty god had answered his prayer. Forthwith he went among the Lycian captains, and bade them come to fight about the body of Sarpedon. From these he strode on among the Trojans to Polydamas, son of Panthous, and Agenor. He then went in search of Aeneas and Hector, and when he had found them, he said, Hector, you have utterly forgotten your allies, who languish here for your sake, far from your friends, and home while you do nothing to support them. Sarpedon, leader of the Lycian warriors, has fallen. He who was at once the right and might of the Lycia. Mars has laid him low by the spear of Patroclus. Stand by him, my friends, and suffer not the Myrmidons to strip him of his armor, nor to treat his body with contumely and revenge for all the Danaans whom we have speared at the ships. As he spoke, the Trojans were plunged in extreme and ungovernable grief, for Sarpedon, alien though he was, had been one of the mainstays of their city, both as having much people with him, and himself the foremost among them all. Led by Hector, who was infuriated by the fall of Sarpedon, they made instantly for the Danaans with all their might, while the undaunted spirit of Patroclus, son of Menoetius, cheered on the Achaeans. First he spoke to the two Ajaxes, men who needed no bidding. Ajaxes, he said, may it now please you to show yourselves to the men you have always been, or even better. Sarpedon is fallen, he who was first to overleap the wall of the Achaeans. Let us take the body and outrage it. Let us strip the armor from his shoulders, and kill his comrades if they try to rescue his body. He spoke to men who themselves were full eager, both sides, therefore, the Trojans and Lycians on the one hand, and the Myrmidons and Achaeans on the other, strengthened their battalions, and fought desperately about the body of Sarpedon, shouting fiercely the while, Mighty was the din of their armor as they came together, and Jove shed a thick darkness over the fight to increase the of the battle over the body of his son. At first the Trojans made some headway against the Achaeans, for one of the best men among the Myrmidons was killed, Epegeus, son of noble Achilles, who had erewhile been king in the good city of Budeum. But presently, having killed a valiant kinsman of his own, he took refuge with Peleus and Thetis, who sent him to Ilius, the land of noble steeds, to fight the Trojans under Achilles. Hector now struck him on the head with a stone, just as he had caught hold of the body, and his brains inside his helmet were all battered in, so that he fell face foremost upon the body of Sarpedon, and there he died. Patroclus was enraged by the death of his comrade, and sped through the front ranks as swiftly as a hawk that swoops down on a flock of daws or starlings. Even so swiftly, O noble knight Patroclus, did you make straight for the Lycians and Trojans to avenge your comrade. Forthwith he struck Sthenelus, the son of Aethiomenes, on the neck with the stone, and broke the tendons that joined to the head and spine. On this Hector, in the front rank of his men, gave ground as far as men can throw a javelin, when competing for some prize or even in battle. So far did the Trojans now retreat before the Achaeans. Glaucus, captain of the Lycians, was the first to rally them by killing Bathocles, son of Chalcon, who lived in Hellas and was the richest man among the Myrmidons. Glaucus turned round suddenly, just as Bathocles, who was pursuing him, was about to lay hold of him, and drove his spear right into the middle of his chest, whereon he fell heavily to the ground, and the fall of so good a man filled the Achaeans with dismay, while the Trojans were exultant, and came upon in a body round the corpse. Nevertheless, the Achaeans, mindful of their prowess, bore straight down upon them. So, Patroclus, in the passage I just read, is described as this hawk, and other times he's described as a wolf or a lion or a boar, which is kind of like Ovid and his poem Hyacinthus and Ganymede. In the first lines, he describes this audience of trees and animals that are gathering. And I want to go back to Ovid's Metamorphoses, the myth of Hyacinthus. You too, Hyacinthus of Amyclae, Phoebus would have placed in heaven, if sad fate had given him time to do so. Still, as it is, you are immortal, and whenever spring drives winter away, and Aries follows watery Pisces, you also rise in the flower of the green turf. My father, Phoebus, loved you above all others, and Delphi, at the center of the world, lost its presiding deity, while the god frequented Eurotas and Sparta without its walls, doing no honor to the zither of the bow. Forgetting his usual pursuits, he did not object to carrying the nets, handling the dogs, or traveling as a companion over the rough mountain ridges, and by constant partnership feeding the flames. Hyacinthus was the son of Amyclus, the legendary founder of the namesake town and temple to Apollo. You have the story of the racial founding of the town, and the flower represents the brave and noble military tradition of Sparta. We also need to consider a more subversive element to it, and that the hyacinth is a toxic plant. It causes nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, heart rate changes, which gives us a good understanding of medicine, right? The hyacinth can also be used as a digestive, it's said, but I guess if you take too much, you're going to be feeling ill. So, right, again, medicine or drugs are kind of these things. If you take a little bit or once in a while, they're good. They have some benefit, but if you go overboard, or maybe if you even take the wrong plant or flower, you become very ill. So you can see how this kind of information or myths become important to kind of decipher which ones are good and which ones aren't. Furthermore, Apollo is said to be distracted from Delphi, the center of the world and seat of his oracle, to wander and hang out with Hyacinthus and Sparta, which kind of happens in the Iliad, that Apollo, protecting Hector and the Trojans, fails to save Sarpedon from Patroclus, but he's able to heal Glaucus. But once again, like, Apollo has to like come down, and he's like transforming into like other people of the Trojans, like he's transforming into soldiers and all that. So it's kind of like that. He has to leave his oracle to come down to fight and cheer on the fighting, like feed the flames, right, of the war. And in the Iliad, Patroclus attracts Hector, and thus Apollo has to come and help kill Patroclus, which causes and then allows the Spartan to have to come defend the body of Patroclus, right? It's this never-ending trigger and then reaction, this cascading event of alliances and treaties that everyone has to come to protect the other person's body, and then because of alliances you have to protect someone else's, and it's intertwined with gods and the hierarchy of Olympus, right? It's a mess. And there's also a lot of kind of historical relevance to this kind of never-ending, these entanglements of treaties. Bringing us back to the story in the Iliad, in Book 16, the fighting rages around the body of Sarpedon as Patroclus is in the mix, and that draws the attention of Hector. So Homer describes it as the buzz of flies that swarm around a pail of milk that might be left out during spring. And this poetic genius and accuracy leads me to believe, yes, one, mythology has many hidden esoteric truths that are used as allegory to explain the natural world. But there's also a historical truth where the late Bronze Age collapse did happen, and it probably could be explained by this kind of never-ending cascade of triggers and reactions and, alliances, and kind of like how we see as a metaphor in the fighting around the bodies in Book 16 and Book 17. And it ends in this mass depopulation of many urban cities and centers of the Mediterranean Near East of that time. And certainly there's many historical examples of these kind of huge conflicts flaring up from vast networks of alliances and treaties. And on a more practical note today, with a more industrial form of agriculture and way of interacting with these markets and essentially harvest cults, it's kind of left us demystified, right? But also less knowledgeable of the seasonality of nature and how every organism exhibits a life cycle like ours. And the metaphor of seasons and kind of the cyclic nature of it lends itself to poetry and other spiritual pursuits, right? The fruit is ripe for the picking, no pun intended. So you'd expect, as the times become more mechanical, automated, industrious, and as a result urban, you lose kind of this spiritual connection to nature, and eventually it causes a dearth in art and other cultural manifestations. So if you go for a walk during the springtime in a park, you'll notice the behavior and appearance of the world is much different than in winter, but also even summer and fall, right? During the spring, flies and other insects like bees are very aggressive, and they're busy because they're hungry from the winter, this kind of dormant state. And eventually, by the summer, the fly and bee population will kind of plateau at a peak, and it's going to begin to fall by autumn. And then by winter, essentially, the bees and other insects will become dormant, and their populations is going to plummet. And most will survive, or some will survive, only to repeat the cycle again. It's not uncommon to get a bee or a wasp in your car or house during the early months of spring or summer, depending on your latitude. But later on in the year, during midsummer, the bees, they're not really interested in your house or for food, right? They've kind of figured that out. They've built a steady place to live, and it's going to be far enough away from human interaction or daily interaction that, they're not going to be in any danger. So they've kind of reached a steady state, right, by summer, and you see that in their population. And then come in the autumn, the bees or insects again are going to become hungry, and they're going to become aggressive as the year goes on, and the temperature drops. So they're going to be looking for a place warm if they can find it, right, to hunker down and keep warm and survive for the coming winter. So let's read further from Book 16 of the Iliad. He led the way as he spoke, and the hero went forward with him. As the sound of woodcutters in some forest glade upon the mountains, and the thud of their axes is heard afar, even such a din now rose from the earth clash of bronze armor and of good ox-hide shields, as men smote each other with their swords and spears anointed and pointed at both ends. A man had need of good eyesight now to know Sarpedon, so covered was he from head to foot with spears and blood and dust. Men swarmed about the bodies as flies that buzz round the full milk pails in spring, when they are brimming with milk. Even so did they gather round Sarpedon, nor did Jove turn his keen eyes away from one moment from the fight, but kept looking at it all the time, for he was settling how best to kill Patroclus, and considering whether Hector should be allowed to end him now in the fight round the body of Sarpedon, and strip him of his armor, or whether he should let him give give yet further trouble to the Trojans. In the end, he deemed it best that the brave squire of Achilles, son of Peleus, should drive Hector and the Trojans back towards the city and take the lives of many. First, therefore, he made Hector turn faint-hearted, whereon he mounted his chariot and fled, bidding the other chariots of Trojans fly also, for he saw that the scales of Jove had turned against him. Neither would the brave Lycians stand firm. They were dismayed when they saw their king lying struck to the heart amid a heap of corpses. When the son of Saturn made the fight wax hot, many had fallen above him. The Achaeans therefore stripped the gleaming armor from his shoulders, and the brave son of Menœtius gave it to his men to take to the ships. Then Jove, lord of the storm cloud, said to Apollo, Dear Phoebus, go, I pray you, and take Sarpedon out of range of the weapons, cleanse the black blood from off him, and then bear him a long way off, when you may wash him in the river, and anoint him with ambrosia, and clothe him with immortal arraignment. This done, commit him to the arms of the two fleet messengers, Death and Sleep, who would carry him straightway to the rich land of Lycia, where his brothers and kinsmen will enter him, and will raise both mound and pillar to his memory, and do honor to the dead. So the body of Sarpedon is rescued, and it's carried away to Lycia, and it's going to be washed and anointed with ambrosia, so that he can be buried and worshipped with monument for his service in battle, for his kinsmen to come and, pray to and worship him. And if you go to Wikipedia, right, there's this site to worship Sarpedon in Anatolia. Then Jove, lord of the storm cloud, said to Apollo, Dear Phoebus, go, I pray you, and take Sarpedon out of range of the weapons, cleanse the black blood from off him, and then bear him a long way off, where you may wash him in the river, anoint him with ambrosia, and clothe him in immortal raiment. This done, commit him to the arms of the two fleet messengers of Death and Sleep, who will carry him straightway to the rich land of Lycia, where his brothers and kinsmen will inter him, and will raise both mound and pillar to his memory, and do honor to the dead. Thus he spoke. Apollo obeyed his father, saying, came down from the heights of Ida into the thick of the fight. Forthwith he took Sarpedon out of range of the weapons, and then bore him a long way off, where he washed him in the river, anointed him with ambrosia, and clothed him in immortal raiment. This done, he committed him to the arms of the two fleet messengers, Death and Sleep, who presently set him down in the rich land of Lycia. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, the death of Hyacinthus is told through the story of Book 16 and Book 17 of the Iliad, and the fighting over the bodies of the fallen comrades, right, and the stealing of one's armor as a trophy. But also there's references in the passages that the fighting is kind of so thick and tiresome. By the midday, everyone is without armor. It's just a way of staving off heat and exhaustion. But in particular, we can link the death of Hyacinthus to the death of Patroclus and the subsequent fighting over the body, and the fight being between Hector and the Trojans against the stand of Menelaus and Ajax to save the body of Patroclus after the armor of Achilles that Patroclus was wearing is stolen by Hector and the Trojans. In Book 16 and 17, the theme of saving the bodies is prevalent, and it's so they can be washed and anointed with oil or ambrosia as this religious rite and ceremony that we still practice today, right, with embalming the dead and preserving the body for mourning and burying them to remember them on a yearly or more frequent basis, right? When you go to the cemetery, there's a gravestone or a monument to mourn them. And it should be obvious to see how Apollo, or the sun, is central to this theme, as well as Jupiter is to Ganymede, right? And that Jupiter gathers the cloud to bring rain, and the sun brings the light and warmth to grow and sustain life. So let's read further from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Now the sun was midway between the vanished and the future night. Equally far from either extreme, they stripped off their clothes, and gleaming with the rich olive oil they had rubbed themselves with, they began a contest with the broad discus. Phoebus went first, balancing it and hurling it high into the air. Scattering the clouds with its weight, its mass took a long time to fall back to the hard ground, showing strength and skill combined. Immediately the Taenarian boy, without thinking, ran forward to pick up the disc, prompted by his eagerness to throw, but the solid earth threw it back, hitting you in the face with the rebound, Hyacinthus. Compare this to the death of Patroclus, right? That Patroclus is, in a sense, like Hyacinthus, that he goes first in the fighting, and then he's eventually killed by Apollo in his doing. Book 16 of the Iliad. The sons of the Achaeans would now have taken Troy by the hands of Patroclus, for his spear flew in all directions. Had not Phoebus Apollo taken his stand upon the wall to defeat his purpose, and to aid the Trojans, thrice did Patroclus charge at an angle of the high wall, and thrice did Apollo beat him back, striking his shield with his own immortal hands. When Patroclus was coming on like a god for yet a fourth time, Apollo shouted to him with an awful voice and said, "Draw back, noble Patroclus. It is not your lot to sack the city of the Trojan chieftains, nor yet will it be that of Achilles, who is a far better man than you are." On hearing this, Patroclus withdrew to some distance and avoided the anger of Apollo. As Homer says, if it wasn't for Apollo, Patroclus would have taken Troy himself. And it's like Ovid's Metamorphoses in this game of discus, or even throwing like a rock, in that he fights a brother of Hector, a Trojan named Cebriones, first, and they throw rocks at one another. And Cebriones is interesting in that it's the name of a giant who fought in the Giant War, which takes place after the Titan War, where the giants tried to build a structure of rocks to sack Olympus. And in the passage I'll read next, Patroclus and Cebriones essentially fight in this kind of allusion to the Giant War, I interpret. And again, also, if you read the first lines of Metamorphoses, of Orpheus sings Ganymede and Hyacinthus, right? Ovid talks about these tales of giants and the Giant War, and you'll see these in Book 16 and Book 17 of the passages, these kind of like allusions to one, Jupiter in the field flashing the thunder, but also the Giant War, where you're building these structures, or people are aligned close to each other, that you're kind of like rocks piling up to the sky, right? Like the Giant War, they tried to build this structure up to Mount Olympus out of rocks. So here, I'll read from Book 16 of the Iliad. As he spoke, he flung himself on Cebriones with a spring, as it were, of a lion, that while attacking the stockyard is himself struck in the chest, and his courage is his own bane. Even so furiously, O Patroclus, did you then spring upon Cebriones. Hector sprang also from his chariot to the ground. The pair then fought over the body of Cebriones, as two lions fight fiercely on some high mountains over the body of a stag that they have killed. Even so did these two mighty warriors, Patroclus, son of Menoetius, and brave Hector, hack and hew at one another over the corpse of Cebriones. Hector would not let go of him when he had once got him by the head, while Patroclus kept fast hold of his feet, and fierce fight raged between the other Danaans and Trojans, as the east and south wind buffet one another when they beat upon some dense forest on the mountains. There is beech and ash and spreading cornel. To the top of the trees roar as they beat on one another, and one can hear the bows and cracking and breaking. Even so did the Trojans and Achaeans spring on one another and lay about each other. Neither side would give away. Many a pointed spear fell to the ground, and many a winged arrow sped from its bowstring and about the body of Cebriones. Many a great stone, moreover, beat on many a shield as they fought around his body. But there he lay in the whirling clouds of dust, all huge and hugely, heedless of his driving now. And as the sun is in the midday, it's an allusion to summer, or early summer maybe. The spring flowers are starting to die, or they're dead, and Patroclus is ready to meet his fate, right? He's like Hyacinthus, he's gonna die. So as long as the sun was still high in mid-heaven, the weapons of either side were alike deadly, and the people fell. But when he went down towards the time when men lose their oxen, the Achaeans proved to be beyond all forecast stronger, so that they drew Cebriones out of the range of the darts and tumult of the Trojans, and stripped the armor from his shoulders. Then Patroclus sprang like Mars with fierce intent, and terrific a shout upon the Trojans, and thrice did he kill 9 men. But as he was coming on like a god for a time, then, O Patroclus, was the hour of your end approaching, for Phoebus fought you like in fell earnest. Patroclus did not see him as he moved about in the crush, for he was enshrouded in thick darkness, and the god struck him from behind. And the god struck him from behind on his back and his broad shoulders with the flat of his hands, so that his eyes turned dizzy. Phoebus Apollo beat the helmet from his head, and it rolled rattling off under the horse's feet, where its horsehair plumes were all begrimed with dust and blood. Never indeed had the helmet fared so before, for it had served to protect the head and comely forehead of the godlike hero Achilles. Now, however, Jupiter delivered it to be worn by Hector. Nevertheless, the end of Hector also was near. The bronze-shod spear, so great and so strong, was broken in the hands of Patroclus, while the shield that covered him from head to foot fell to the ground. as did also the band that held it, and Apollo undid the fastenings of his corselet. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that hyacinths are toxic and that they cause nausea, vomiting, and like uh, diarrhea and then heart rate changing. And perhaps Patroclus has kind of suffered from these effects, and it's metamorphosed into the parable of Apollo smacking him in the head, like in the Iliad, or the discus in Ovid's Metamorphoses, or just in general the tale of Hyacinthus. In Ovid's telling of Hyacinth, he describes the boy falling and drooping over like that of the flowers when they are damaged or have their stems broken. But this also kind of doubles in meaning, I imagine, to alluding to the effects of these drugs. So here, let's read from Ovid's Metamorphoses. The god is as white as the boy and cradles the fallen body. Now he tries to revive you, now to staunch your dreadful blood, and now applies herbs to hold back your departing spirit. His arts are useless. The wound is incurable, just as if when someone in a garden breaks violets, stiff poppies, or the lilies, with their bristling yellow stamens, and suddenly they droop, bowing their weakened heads, unable to support themselves, and their tops gaze at the soil. So his dying head droops, and with failing strength, the neck is overburdened and sinks onto the shoulder. So we can compare this to an earlier passage in Book 8 of the Iliad. It's not Book 16, but it's earlier in Book 8. But it has very, very similar language describing both the effects of opium use on a person, where they commonly will pass out or just lose the ability to hold their head up due to the depressive nature of the drug. But also it seamlessly kind of is used as a metaphor for the natural world in particular, right? That of the poppy plant, how the head of the plant will droop, and it kind of resembles the head of a person, or a person perhaps dying in battle. And also kind of signifies this time of year probably for harvest, right? This midday sun. So let's read from the Iliad, Book 8. And Teucer answered, Most noble son of Atreus, you need not urge me. From the moment we began to drive them back to Ilius, I have never ceased so far as me to look out for men who I can shoot and kill. I have shot 8 barbed shafts, and all of them have been buried in the flesh of warlike youths. But this mad dog I cannot hit. As he spoke, he aimed another arrow straight at Hector, for he was bent on hitting him. Nevertheless, he missed him, and the arrow hit Priam's brave son Gorgythion in the breast. His mother, fair Cassianera, lovely as a goddess, had been married from Asimime, and now he bowed his head as a garden poppy in full bloom when it is weighted down by showers in spring. Even thus heavy bowed his head beneath the weight of his helmet. So see, it's kind of very similar language how they compare the garden poppy in full bloom. It's kind of been weighing down, and it's metamorphosed as like a soldier dying. Going back to Ovid's Metamorphoses, you slip away, Spartan, robbed of the flower of youth. Phoebus sighed, and I see my guilt in your wound. You are my grief and my reproach. Your death must be ascribed to my hand. I am the agent of your destruction. Yet how was it my fault? Unless taking part in a game can be called the fault. Unless it can be called the fault to have loved you. If only I might die with you and pay with my life. So the reference to a Spartan, I argue, is a reference to Menelaus, where Menelaus was the king of Sparta, and in Book 17, he defends the body of Patroclus along with Ajax from Hector and the Trojans. So let's read the ending of Book 16 of the Iliad. Then as the life ebbed out of you, you answered, O knight Patroclus, Hector, vaunt as you will, for Jove, the son of Saturn, and Apollo have vouchsafed you victory. It is they who have vanquished me so easily, and they who have stripped the armor from my shoulders. Had 20 such men as you attacked me, all of them would have fallen before my spear. Fate and the son of Leto have overpowered me, and among mortal men, Euphorbus, you are yourself third only in the killing of me. I say further, and lay my saying to your heart, you too shall live. But for a little season, death and the day of your doom are close upon you, and they will lay you low by the hand of Achilles, son of Aeacus. As Patroclus lays dying, he blames Apollo and fate for his death, as it was Apollo who was provoking the Trojans and protecting Hector from dying, right? And he's the one who causes like Patroclus to die, right? He knocks him out, and it makes sense also that Apollo is central to these particular books, also Ovid's rendition of the Hyacinth myth, where the seasons, plant growth, calendar are all functions of the sun and its gravity, right? And the ancients obviously knew to connect both of these, right? It's obvious from the text if you interpret it right. I argue. In addition, Homer mentions this Euphorbus character, a Trojan soldier, who is third. He's like third to the body of Patroclus after, as he says, right? Jove is first, and then it's Apollo who is second in kind of this chain of command. But the moral is this Euphorbus character who spears him. And Euphorbus is a name for now many species of plants, and in particular it's the latex-like liquid it produces and the medicinal properties of it. Most notably, the latex coagulates in the sun, and this coagulating in the sun would have uses for both the blood clotting and the ability to kind of probably put on wounds and stop the bleeding, and it might also have uses for pain relief. So I'll read here from a passage, and I'll read from a site on the internet that documents kind of this properties of this plant. The irritating milky latex of this cactiform succulent plant is expelled from incisions made in the quadrangular stems, coagulates in the sun, and the resinous mass, euphorbium, is collected and sold in local markets. This latex was known to Pliny the Elder as a drastic purgative emetic and for the treatment of abscesses. However, because of the severe nature of its effects, it is no longer used medicinally. It also has other uses, including preserving leather and wood. So perhaps this is kind of like a guide to pick the right plants, right? These myths are important to know, so you don't pick the wrong ones. But also there's this kind of like industrious or medicinal properties of it, right? That you could have uses for it for leather making, but also wood making. Going back to the Iliad. When he had thus spoken, his eyes were closed in death, his soul left his body, and flitted down to the house of Hades, mourning its sad fading, bidding farewell to the youth and vigor of its manhood. Dead though he was, Hector still spoke to him, saying, Patroclus, why should you thus foretell my doom? Who knows but Achilles, son of lovely Thetis, may be smitten by my spear and die before me? As he spoke, he drew the bronze spear from the wound, planting his foot upon the body, which he thrust off and let lie on its back. He then went spear in hand after Automedon, squire of the fleet descendant of Aeacus, for he longed to lay him low, but the immortal steeds, which the gods had given as a rich gift to Peleus, bore him swiftly from the field. Switching back to Ovid's Metamorphoses. But since the laws of fate bind us, you shall always be with me, and cling to my remembering lips. My songs, the lyre my hand touches, will celebrate you. As a new-formed flower, you shall denote my woe by your markings, and the time will come when Ajax, bravest of heroes, will associate himself with this same flower, and be identified by its petals. With the truthful mouth of Apollo uttered these words, Look, the blood that had spilt on the ground, staining the grass, was no longer blood, and a flower sprang up, brighter than the Tyrian dye, and took the shape of a lily, though it was purple in color, where the other is silvery white. Not satisfied with this alone, Phoebus himself marked his grief on the petals, and the flower bore the letters Ai, Ai, the letters of woe traced there. Nor was Sparta ashamed of producing Hyacinthus. His honor has lasted to this day, and by the ancient custom, the Hyacinthia is celebrated at its annual return by displaying the flower in procession. Reading from Book 17 of the Iliad, the body of Menelaus serves as metamorphosis for the hyacinth flower, where his body is covered in blood, like the flower mentioned in Ovid's poem, and then he slews this Euphorbus, and the braided hair of Euphorbus is silver and gold in bands, and it's also covered in blood, and it serves as symbol for the covered petals, right? Once again, this pile of bodies, and everyone, people getting buried in them, right? It's this metaphor for plants or flowers. But it also serves as kind of this symbol of honor and bravery to fight and never leave your comrades behind, right? Again, like the poppy today and its reference or its meaning tied to the world wars, in particular World War I. Furthermore, looking into the etymology of Menelaus, it means literally restraining the people from metonym to stay, abide, remain, plus laos, people. So his naming convention implies that he's kind of this honorable Spartan figure and that he's going to stay and remain with his people, right? As Menelaus is going to stay and fight for the body of Patroclus, but also could have kind of this more sinister interpretation, right? He's restraining the people, or this kind of drug or addiction-like connotation. But also, it's probably just kind of this instruction guide into the proper methods of harvesting and processing the plant-like material, in addition to the uses of medicinal plants, right? It's told in this kind of poetic way where you weave both the violent story of the Trojan War with the natural world of the Iron Age. And again, it's also probably serves as warning of the potentially lethal effects of these drugs. So going into Book 17 of the Iliad, brave Menelaus, son of Atreus, now came to know that Patroclus had fallen, and made his way through the front ranks clad in full armor to bestride him. As a cow stands lowing over her first calf, even so did yellow-haired Menelaus bestride Patroclus. He held his round shield and his spear in front of him, resolute to kill anyone who would dare face him. But the son of Panthous also had noted the body and came up to Menelaus, saying, Menelaus, son of Atreus, draw back, leave the body, and let the blood-stained spoils be. I was the first of the Trojans and their brave allies to drive my spear into Patroclus. Let me, therefore, have my full glory among the Trojans, or I will take aim and kill you. To this Menelaus answered in great anger, By great Jove, boasting is an ill thing. The pard is not more bold, nor the lion, nor savage wild boar, which is the fiercest and most dauntless of all creatures. Then are the proud sons of Panthous. Yet Hypernor did not see out the days of his youth, when he made light of me and withstood me, deeming me the meanest soldier among the Danaans. His own feet never bore him back to gladden his wife and parents. Even so shall I make an end of you too, if you withstand me. Get you back into the crowd and do not face me, or it shall be worse for you. Even a fool may be wise after the event. Euphorbus would not listen, and said, Now indeed, Menelaus, shall you pray for the death of my brother, over whom you vaunted, and whose wife you widowed in her bridal chamber, while you brought grief unspeakable on his parents. I shall comfort these poor people if I bring your head and armor and place them in the hands of Panthous and noble Phrontis. The time is come when this matter shall be fought out and settled, for me or against me. As he spoke, he struck Menelaus full on the shield, but the spear did not go through, for the shield turned its point. Menelaus then took aim, praying to Father Jove as he did so. Euphorbus was drawing back, and Menelaus struck him about the roots of his throat, leaning his whole weight on the spear so as to drive it home. The point went clean through his neck, and his armor rang rattling around him as he fell heavily to the ground. His hair, which was like that of the Graces, and his locks so deftly bound in bands of silver and gold, were all bedrabbled with blood. As one who has grown a fine young olive tree in a clear space, where there is abundance of water, the plant is full of promise, and though the winds beat upon it from every quarter, it puts forth its white blossoms, till the blast of some fierce hurricane sweep down upon it and level it to the ground. Even so did Menelaus strip the fair youth Euphorbus of his armor after he had slain him. Or some fierce lion upon the mountains in the pride of his youth fastens on the finest heifer in the herd as it is feeding. First he breaks her neck with his strong jaws, then he gorges on her blood and entrails. Dogs and shepherds raise a hue and cry against him, but they stand aloof and will not come close to him, for they are pale with fear. Even so, no one had the courage to face valiant Menelaus. The son of Atreus would have then carried off the armor of the son of Panthous with ease, had not Phoebus Apollo been angry, and in the guise of Mentes, chief of the Cicons, incited Hector to attack him. Hector, said he, you are now going after the horses of the noble son of Aeacus, but you will not take them? They cannot be kept in hand and driven by mortal man, save only by Achilles, who is son to an immortal mother. Meanwhile, Menelaus, son of Atreus, has bestridden the body of Patroclus, and killed the noblest of the Trojans, Euphorbus, son of Panthous, so that he cannot fight no more. The god then went back into toil and turmoil, but the soul of Hector was darkened with a cloud of grief. He looked along the ranks and saw Euphorbus lying on the ground with the blood still flowing from his wound, and Menelaus stripping him of his armor. On this he made his way to the front like a flame of fire, clad in his gleaming armor, and crying with a loud voice. When the son of Atreus heard him, he said to himself in dismay, Alas, what shall I do? I may not let the Trojans take the armor of Patroclus, who has fallen fighting on my behalf, lest some Danaan who sees me should cry shame upon me. Still, if for my honor's sake I fight Hector and the Trojans single-handed, they will prove too many for me, for Hector is bringing them up in force. Why, however, shall I thus hesitate, when a man fights in despite of heaven with one whom a god befriends? He will soon rue it, and let no Danaan think ill of me if I give place to Hector, for the hand of heaven is with him. Yet if I could find Ajax, the two of us would fight Hector and heaven too, if we might only save the body of Patroclus, for Achilles son of Peleus. This of many evils would be the least. While he was thus in two minds, the Trojans came up to him with Hector at their head. He therefore drew back and left the body, turning about like some bearded lion who is being chased by dogs and men from a stockyard with spears and hue and cry, whereon he is daunted and slinks sulkily off. Even so did Menelaus, son of Atreus, turn and leave the body of Patroclus. When among the body of his men he looked around for mighty Ajax, son of Telamon, and presently saw him on the extreme left of the fight, cheering on his men and exhorting them to keep on fighting, for Phoebus Apollo had spread a great panic among them. He ran up to him and said, Ajax, my good friend, come with me and at once to dead Patroclus, if so be that we may take the body to Achilles. As for his armor, Hector already has it. These words stirred the heart of Ajax, and he made his way among the front ranks, Menelaus with him. Hector had stripped Patroclus of his armor and was dragging him away to cut off his head and take the body to fling before the dogs of Troy. But Ajax came up with him, with his shield like a wall before him, on which Hector withdrew under the shelter of his men, and sprang onto his chariot, giving armor over to the Trojans to take to the city, as a great trophy for himself. Ajax therefore covered the body of Patroclus with his broad shield, and bestrode him as a lion stands over his whelps if hunters have come upon him in a forest when he is with his little ones. In the pride and fierceness of his strength he draws his knit brows down till they cover his eyes. Even so did Ajax bestride the body of Patroclus, and by his side stood Menelaus, son of Atreus, nurturing great sorrow in his heart. And then further into Book 17, thus did they fight as it were a flaming fire. It seemed as though it had gone hard, even when the sun and moon, for they were hidden all over the part where the bravest heroes were fighting about the dead son of Menoetius, whereas the other Danaans and Achaeans fought at their ease in full daylight with brilliant sunshine all around them, and there was not a cloud to be seen neither on plain nor mountain. These last, moreover, would rest for a while and leave off fighting, for they were some distance apart and beyond the range of one another's weapons. Whereas those who were in the thick of the fray suffered both from battle and darkness. All the best of them were being worn out by the great weight of their armor. But the two valiant heroes, Thrasymedes and Antilochus, had not yet heard of the death of Patroclus, and believed him to be still alive, and leading the van against the Trojans, they were keeping themselves in reserve against the death or rout of their own comrades, for so Nestor had ordered when he had sent them from the ships into battle. Thus through the livelong day did they wage fierce war, and their sweat of their toil rained over on their legs under them, and on their hands and eyes, as they fought over the squire of the fleet son of Peleus. It was when a man gives a great ox hide all drenched in fat to his men, and bids them stretch it, whereon they stand around it, and wring it and tug it till the moisture leaves, and the fat soaks in for the many that pull at it, and it is well stretched. Even so did the two sides tug the dead body hither and thither, within the compass of a little bit of space, but the Trojans steadfastly set on a dragging into Ilias, while the Achaeans were no less so on taking it to their ships, and fierce was the fight between them. Not Mars himself, the lord of the host, nor yet Minerva, even in their fullest fury, could make light of such a battle. So again, this is kind of interesting that euphorbus and the latex-like material that is exuded from the bulb upon puncture was said to be used in leather making and wood preservation in it. And it seems this passage, again, is kind of this processing of materials using plant-based chemicals. So it's like a Bronze Age or Iron Age industrial process guide. So it's the wringing and tugging of the oxhide, right? It's the processing of the material to get this leather or this more valuable or useful product out of it, right? It's this Iron Age industry or Bronze Age industry. Reading further, such fearful turmoil of men and horses did Jove on that day ordain round the body of Patroclus. Meanwhile, Achilles did not know that he had fallen, for the fight was under the wall of Troy, a long way off the ships. He had no idea, therefore, that Patroclus was dead, and deemed that he would return alive as soon as he had gone close up to the gates. He knew that he was not to sack the city neither with nor without himself, for his mother had often told him this when he had sat alone with her, and she had informed him of the counsels of great Jove. Now, however, she had not told him how great a disaster had befallen him in the death of the one who was the far dearest to him of all his comrades. The others still kept on charging one around the other body with their pointed spears and killing each other. Then one would say, "My friends, we can never again show our faces at the ships. Better and greatly better that earth should open and swallow us here in this place, than that we should let the Trojans have the triumph of bearing off Patroclus' body to their city." The Trojans also on their part spoke to one another, saying, "Friends, though we fall to a man besides this body, let none shrink from fighting." With such words did they exhort each other. They fought, and an iron clank rose through the void air to the brazen vault of heaven. Reading further into Book 17 of the Iliad. Thus then did he run weeping from the field to carry the bad news to Achilles, son of Peleus. Nor were you, O Menelaus, minded to succor his harassed comrades when Antilochus had left the Pylians, and greatly did they miss him. But he sent them noble Thrasymedes, and himself went back to Patroclus. He came running up to the two Ajaxes and said, "I have sent Antilochus to the ships to tell Achilles, but rage against Hector as he may be, he cannot come, for he cannot fight without armor. When then he will be our best plan as both regards rescuing the dead and our own escape from death amid the battle cries of the Trojans." Ajax answered, "Menelaus, you have said well. Do you then and Meriones stoop down, raise the body, and bear it out of the fray, while we two behind you keep off Hector and the Trojans, one in heart as in name, and long used to fighting side by side with one another." On this, Menelaus and Meriones took the dead man in their arms and lifted him high aloft with a great effort. The Trojan host raised a hue and cry raised behind them when they saw that the Achaeans bearing the body away, and flew after them like hounds attacking a wounded boar at the lieu of a band of young huntsmen. For a while the hounds fly at him as though they would tear him to pieces, but now again he turns on them in a fury, scaring and scattering them in all directions. Even so did the Trojans for a while charge in a body, striking with sword and with spears pointed at both the ends. But when the two Ajaxes faced them and stood at bay, they would turn pale, and no man dared press on to fight further about the dead. In this wise did the two heroes strain every nerve to bear the body to the ships of the fight. The battle raged round them like fierce flames that once when kindled spread like wildfire over a city, and the houses fall in the glare of its burning. Even such was the roar and tramp of men and horses that pursued them as they bore Patroclus from the field, or as mules that pull forth at all their strength to draw some beam or a great piece of ship's timber down a rough mountain track, and they pant and sweat as they go. Oh, even so did Menelaus pant and sweat as they bore the body of Patroclus. Behind them the two Ajaxes held stoutly out, as some wooded mountain spur that stretches out across the plain will turn water and check the flow even of a great river. Nor is there any stream strong enough to break through it. Even so did the two Ajaxes face the Trojans and stem the tide of their fighting, though they kept pouring on towards them, and foremost among them was Aeneas, son of Anchises, with valiant Hector, as a flock of daws or starlings fall to screaming and chattering when they see a falcon, foe it to small birds, came soaring near them. Even so did the Achaean youth raise a babel of cries as they fled before Aeneas and Hector, unmindful of their former prowess. In the rout of the Danaans, much goodly armor fell around about the trench, and of fighting there was no end. So Book 17 ends in this epic stand of Menelaus and the two Ajax around the body of Patroclus, and tons of bodies are piled up dead everywhere, and the fighting it's all day, right? It's the stuff of legends, books 16 and 17. And the Spartans today we know as these martial and honorable people. Think of the 300 who held at Thermopylae. It's similar vein as in Book 17 of the Iliad, with Menelaus, the king of Sparta, making a stand. In addition, Book 16 and Book 17 give glimpses into the depths that the ancient man knew of the seasonal nature of the earth due to its orbit of the sun, and by analyzing and reading the poetry of the ancient, you have to conclude that they knew the science and nature of the world in a more spiritual and knowledgeable way than most modern men do today, no matter how much you effing love science, right? You could also say the ancients also understood nature in a more industrious, sustainable, and dare I say, green way, where the earth and human have to kind of be one with the surrounding habitat and ecosystem. The various organisms and species of wildlife needed to be understood as a way to harness them to gain wealth and power and progress society, but also as a way to attain spiritual and religious fulfillment. When reading Homer, it's seamless and nearly perfect, the balance between nature, violence, human politics, and the food chain of the wild. From the nature of bees to the everyday life of soldiers, all the interfaces of various cults, personalities, sciences of agriculture, botany, biology, war, fallen comrades. It goes together without losing any realism or authenticity, without skimping on the mythical and poetic language of metaphor and parables. You're reading the Bronze Age legend. You're looking into the time of the author and their compiled knowledge of the world up to that point of writing. And I argue it's consciously written with this kind of certain context regarding the current politics and dialectic of their time that we can infer through textual analysis and relate back to the politics and world of today. But the myths over time can be purposely or perversely reinterpreted and retold in a more subversive fashion. But this, of course, is not authentic and it's not sustainable, much like the toxic world of today of industrious production of chemicals that create pollution. That's going to define the plastic age. The initiations are cheap and they're meaningless and not really believable. The symbiotic nature of man and earth has been perverted, and you have what you see today in this clunky, dumb, inauthentic, redundant, inorganic poetry and art, right? It sucks. And while perfect, the Iliad is, in my opinion, the picking apart of an already degenerated myth in itself, right? You're taking the armor off a dead person and claiming it to be some great trophy. The vultures and dogs are cleaning the bones off to the deceased. The city of Troy itself has been sacked for the upteenth time, and its inhabitants subjected to worshiping other gods besides their patron deity. You're talking about something that was already degenerated, and by the time of the Iliad, it's autumn, and it's going into winter, and those busy bees of the summer are looking for a place to settle for the freeze of the upcoming winter.
Yes, we were back then a democracy, before us, and we've been plundered and squeezed dry. No more. What does democracy or authoritarian state mean for those international hyenas? They don't care at all. They are only interested in one thing. Are you willing to be plundered? Yes or no? Are you stupid enough to keep quiet in the process? Yes or no? And, when a democracy is stupid enough not to stand up, then it is good. But when an authoritarian state declares you do not plunder our people any longer, neither from the inside or outside, then that is bad. In reality, money rules in these countries. They talk about press freedom when in fact these newspapers have one owner and the owner is, in any case, the sponsor. This press then shapes public opinion. These political parties don't have any differences at all, like before with us. You already know the old political parties. They were all the same. Then people must think that especially in these countries of freedom and wealth, there should exist a very comfortable life for its people, but the opposite is the case. In these countries, in the so-called democracies, the people are by no means the main focus of attention. What really matters is the existence of this group of democracy makers. That is, the existence of a few hundred of giant capitalists who own all the factories and shares and who, ultimately, lead the people. They are not interested at all in the great mass of people. They are the only ones who can be addressed as international elements because they conduct their business everywhere. It is a small, rootless, international clique that is turning the people against each other, that does not want them to have peace. They can suppress us. They can kill us, if you like. But we will not capitulate.